Today, I am going to be talking about meditation, and I am getting the material from this talk primarily from a book by Trangu Rinpoche that is titled The Practice of Tranquility and Insight. First of all, when we meditate, it's very important to have proper meditation. Actually, before we do any Dharma activity, whether it be practice, reading, contemplating, it is to be doing this for the benefit of all beings, that if this helps you, may it allow you to be more helpful to all beings. So keep that in mind. And this, of course, is important in listening to this talk too, that your motivation is that this will help you be of more benefit to others. The purpose of meditation is to help our minds settle down, that our minds are actually quite wild if we start paying attention to them. If we don't pay attention to them, we're not even aware that they're wild, that our minds go all over the place. So Trangu Rinpoche begins in the part that I want to talk about by quoting Shanti Deva from The Way of the Bodhisattva. So the first verse is, those who wish to keep a rule of life must guard their minds in perfect self-possession. Without this guard upon the mind, no discipline can ever be maintained. So what he's talking about here is this rule of life is a person's practice, that we have to have our mind tamed and under our control, or else we engage in activities of body, speech, and mind that are harmful for ourselves and harm other people. That an untamed mind is being controlled by outer circumstances or inner circumstances. And interesting enough, it's always easy to see it in other people, how their mind wanders around and will do things that seem contradictory or say things that seem contradictory. So if we discipline our mind, this keeps us from harming ourselves and harming others. And discipline here is not punishment. Discipline here is this element of doing things a certain way because you behave better and you are more beneficial to other people. And meditation then is a form of disciplining our mind. And if we do something non-virtuous, well, then we confess it and purify it. We don't ignore it. We don't pretend like it didn't happen. We just admit it and purify it and let go of it. The last thing we want to do is engage in a discipline where we keep bringing this activity up over and over again and telling ourselves how bad we are. The next verse is, wandering where it will, the elephant of mind will bring us down to pains of deepest hell. No worldly beast, however wild, could bring upon us such calamities. And the elephant analogy is used because the elephant is very powerful. But on the other hand, an elephant can be tamed and it can be controlled. And when it's tamed, it's very useful. So it is our mind that creates all of our pain, all of our suffering. It's very powerful in that respect and in other respects. But on the other hand, when we tame it, it can be extremely useful. The next verse, if with mindfulness rope, the elephant of mind is tethered all around, our fears will come to nothing. Every virtue drops into our hands. So the rope of mindfulness means controlling the mind with mindfulness, not tying it to a stake. Mindfulness means paying attention to the details. It needs to be accompanied by awareness, which is not only being aware of what you're mindful of, but seeing the bigger picture too. You could say mindfulness is seeing the tree and awareness is seeing the forest. Awareness lets us know when we lose our mindfulness, when we start wandering in thoughts. So paying attention to what's going on in our mind, and then with awareness, being aware when we're not paying attention, and then carefully bringing our minds back to what we are doing, to the present. All of this is this rope of mindfulness. So it's actually a good analogy. It is a flawed analogy in that it makes it sound like we're tying our mind to a stake and becoming very inflexible, but it's the opposite of that. It says our fears will come to nothing. What this is indicating is that our fear is in the mind. It's nowhere else. It's not in another person. It's not in external circumstances. And fear is a combination of thoughts and our habitual patterns. You may have become aware of this in yourself or, again, other people. It's amazing how we can see other people sometimes more clearly than we can see ourselves when it comes to faults. How something happens and then you automatically kind of look at the dark side instead of seeing it as, well, yeah, this is a problem, but it's not a big problem. And frequently we go, this is a huge problem, and blow it all out of proportion. So this helps tame our mind and helps keep us from going to the negative as soon as something happens. And non-virtue was motivated by fear. You can even be afraid to act virtuously. So with mindfulness, fear loses its grip. And when fear loses its grip, it's much easier for us to behave virtuously. The next verse is tigers, lions, elephants, and bears, snakes, and every hostile beast, those who guard the prisoners in hell, all ghosts and ghouls, and every evil phantom. So now he is going through a list of things that we can be afraid of. Here in this country, we're not so worried about tigers, lions, elephants. Now, I've seen bear on my land, and I've seen snakes on my land. I've seen wolves and coyotes on my land. One time I had a neighbor's dog. I had a female dog, and the dog was in heat, and my neighbor's male dog came over. And I was in the lower part of the barn, and that dog, which was a large dog, started getting defensive and growling and snarling at me. And now, yeah, that can cause fear. And I had nothing to hit it with or throw at it. And this is kind of an aside. What I did, this is long before I was a Buddhist, I started yelling at it very loudly because it was trying to demonstrate verbally and through physical action aggression. So I just gave it right back to the dog, and the dog backed down and walked away. But there are better ways to deal with fear. And what kind of fear can we have here in the 21st century? Well, I've got a long list here. First of all, eating the wrong food. Chogyam Trungpa talked about Americans as having food neurosis. And some of this here, has a basis, a valid basis. For instance, an allergy. Or it could be we don't want certain chemicals in the food, or we don't want the food to be produced incorrectly, or we don't want it to come from the wrong country, or GMOs, or whatever, coming from the wrong store. I even had a person that would come here to the center for Sunday practice. And when we were done, this person would open up my refrigerator and take out food that was past the use by date without telling me. She would take it home and feed it to her animals, her dogs. This is one fear. Another one is not being in control of outer circumstances and people. Sometimes they talk about a feeling of entitlement. When I have talked about this in the past, some people talk about cats not getting your way. And I think this describes a lot of cats. They wake you up in the morning because they're hungry. I need food. So people too can be afraid of not being in control of outer circumstances and afraid of people that they feel are not doing what they want or behaving the way they want. A third fear is just plain paranoia. Nowadays, there are endless conspiracy theories, just endless conspiracy theories. And again, it's easy to see this in other people, but we also can fall prey to paranoia, thinking that when something bad happens, an accident, that this wasn't an accident for whatever reason. Or let's say at work and something comes up and a colleague does something or says something that affects you in a negative way or affects you in a negative emotional way. And you start thinking they did that purposely, where it maybe have just been totally off the cuff, so to speak, with no intention to harm you, or they would have acted that way with anybody in that situation, whereas you think they're singling you out. Another fear is fear of making a fool of yourself in public, a fear of not being perfect, a fear of being vulnerable. Then there's, of course, a fear of dying, a fear of others dying. Some people have a difficult time attending a funeral, for instance. It's too real. And needless to say, a lot of people become very fearful when the prospect of death comes up, especially their own death, where they get a diagnosis from the doctor that is not good. I've watched much of the 1-6 hearings, and the last one, they talked about the Secret Service getting in such a state as the Capitol is being besieged that some of them were calling up their loved ones and saying their final goodbye. Another one is fear of suffering. Oh, this could be painful. Suffering, I don't like pain. Even having fear is painful, fear of being afraid. And then there's, this is very current, a fear of economic insecurity, inflation, job loss. There's more than just these hostile beasts and elephants and bears and the guards in hell and ghosts and ghouls and so forth, that these other things would be included in that too. So the next verse is, by simply binding of this mind alone, all these things are likewise bound. By simple taming of this mind alone, all these things are likewise tamed. So by binding things with mindfulness, with being present, this takes care of all of these fears. Because again, fear is the activity of the mind. Fear is not in external circumstances, it's in our mind. I sometimes reflect when I have reacted to something or another, what would Khenpo Karta Rinpoche have done in this situation? And it's easy to say, well, he never would have been in that situation. Well, he was in some pretty tough situations when the Chinese attacked Krongu Monastery and when this group of refugees were fleeing. One of the stories that I heard about him was that Krongu Monastery, where Khenpo Rinpoche lived before he had to flee, that the Chinese were up above in the mountains and started shelling the monastery without, of course, telling anybody. And so here these shells are landing on the monastery, the shrine room building, and so forth. And everybody gets up and runs and they start grabbing things, statues, texts, and so forth. Rinpoche grabbed an old monk who couldn't walk fast. Another story that he told was when this group, and it was a large group, I think it could have been as many as 150 people, monks, nuns, Rinpoches, Prangu Rinpoche, and lay people. And they were basically refugees traveling through Tibet, trying to keep out of view. And at one point, the Chinese army again found them and started shooting at them. And everybody immediately got up and just ran and left all their belongings. And Rinpoche is running and he's seeing bullets hitting in the grass in front of him as he's running, and he can hear the bullets whizzing by his ears. So he has been in plenty of fearful situations, but the fear wasn't present at that time, by the way. But what I saw of him was that he maintained a very calm, peaceful state of mind, and he did not let fear get the best of him. So instead of trying to control outer circumstances so that our life goes better, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, it's more important to work on our minds, becoming mindful, more mindful, taming the mind, and then the rest becomes much easier. There is a story of the two traveling monks. And of course, they're on a footpath, and the footpath has rocks in it, and there are roots that stick up over the ground, and maybe even a puddle or two. And they're walking on this barefoot. And finally, the young monk turns to the old monk and says, "You know, this would be much easier if they would cover this path with leather." And the old monk said, or the older monk said, "Well, yes, that's true, but it would be much easier to just put leather on the bottom of our feet." So if we can maintain mindfulness, then traveling through life's ups and downs becomes free of fear. We become calmer, more peaceful, and everybody benefits. All those people that we come in contact benefit too. So we need to have a peaceful and a happy mind. And when we have that, then we can develop inner wisdom. We can develop stability and clarity. Lots of things come from a peaceful, tamed mind. And here is a quote from the book by Prangu Rinpoche. "One might think that Shamata is a state of no thoughts, perhaps like that of a stone. This is incorrect because in Shamata meditation, the mind is very calm and stable and also very clear, so that it can distinguish and discriminate between all phenomena and see everything as very distinct." End of quote. So this calm mind is focusing one pointedly without distraction and seeing differences. It's not, you might say, by being very, very mindful, blocking out the rest of what's happening. It has this not only seeing the tree, as I said, but also seeing the forest aspect. Prangu Rinpoche is talking about here, it can discriminate between all phenomena and see everything very distinctly. Again, a good example is a mason jar of muddy water. And as long as we're shaking up this jar, the water remains muddy. But if you take that jar and put it down on the table and let it sit for a few hours, the mud settles to the bottom and the natural clarity of the water appears. You don't have to do anything. Just put it down. So by letting go when we meditate, it isn't that thoughts don't arise, it is that our mind doesn't grasp at the thoughts. It sees them, recognizes them, and lets go of them because it is calm, it is stable, it sees things clearly, but it is not moved to, oh, this thought is important. I better look into it and so forth. It just lets go of it, lets it go by. No big deal. And he says, perhaps like a stone, that we could get the idea that meditation is like a stone. I've seen people meditate with smiles on their face or meditate like this. So it's not going into a state where you're just not aware of anything. You're totally spaced out or you're totally blissed out, because there you don't have this awareness factor of being able to discriminate between this and that. It's that you're very focused on this blank spaced out state or blank blissed out state. The problem with being blissed out is, first of all, you're not accomplishing anything. You're developing a habit that can be a huge problem. And secondly, you get up off of the cushion and then you go out into the world. Let's say you're driving home, and then there is this driver that cuts in front of you, and you have to slam on the brakes. Well, suddenly your bliss is gone, and maybe now you're angry at the person in front of you for destroying your bliss. It's not about taking a vacation from reality or the world. It's seeing it very clearly. So there are some prerequisites for meditating properly. First is to have a favorable place, a place that is quiet, free of distractions. He says with a healthy, moderate temperature, not too hot, not too cold. And it's good to be free of lots of desires, thinking, I need this to meditate, or I need that to meditate. I need more statues. I need more paintings. I need a better Bell and Dorje set. I need a better teacup. Maybe a bigger teacup would be better. But anyway, let go of all of that. Be content. Think at least what I have now is fine. And then give up worldly activities when you're meditating. Stop focusing on what you will do when you are finished meditating. It's also helpful to, you might say, do a personal assessment of your life and reduce your activity in general. With the digital world today, it is so easy to be distracted. And instead of meditating, thinking about Facebook or texting or whatever, thinking about the news. And then, of course, there's always compulsive busyness of any kind. So it's good to do what you can to reduce your daily activities, because they make it more difficult to meditate. You start meditating, and of course, these thoughts come up about things that you need to do, things that have happened, and so on and so forth. And it's easy to think when this happens that, oh, I can't meditate. There's no point to it because my mind just keeps churning out this stuff and I'm helpless. Well, it's your own mind, and it is possible to work with it. And one of the signs of meditating is that you become much more aware of how busy your mind really is. And so when we are meditating, to prepare for it, it's good to try to avoid distractions and desires. And when they do come up, when we're sitting, is just let go of them as soon as you realize that this is the direction your mind is going. One type of meditation, this is kind of a good place to start, is meditation on an external object. This helps develop concentration. And a simple small stone would do for this type of meditation. The stone is just a stone. It's not spiritual in any way. And the stone doesn't have much in the terms of features. Maybe it's kind of round and the same color, not too much texture to it. So there's not a lot of distraction thinking about all the different features. We're not talking about a stone sculpture here, just a rock. And then you just look at it. And every time your mind wanders, bring your mind back to looking at this rock. This is using a mundane object. Now, using a pure object would be put a sacred statue in front of you. Or, you could put a dorje in front of you and just look at it and keep your mind there. And when it wanders, bring it back. You can use any of the five senses. I have attended meditation sessions where the Lama will go like this. And you just keep listening to that sound like you would looking at a visual object. You just keep concentrating on that sound. So this is using sensory input to meditate on. You can have meditation without an external object. And that would be like visualizing a deity, visualizing your body. In some practices, we visualize what's inside of our body. Using the breath is using, you might say, an external object, but the breath is very subtle and it requires a much higher level of concentration because the breath can almost disappear. As we meditate, our mind can become very calm, our body can be very calm, and we're just barely breathing. The third type of meditation, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about meditating on the essential nature, quote, resting in the essence, resting in the nature of awareness, being aware of being aware, so to speak. Mingyur Rinpoche talks about open awareness, where the mind isn't focused on anything. It's just completely resting, it's stable, it's unwavering, that you are resting in a completely stable and unwavering experience. But of course, it's temporary at this point. Now we have gross and we have subtle thoughts. What happens when we first start meditating is that gross thoughts come up, the thoughts that are very obvious, very strong, and we get distracted by them very easily. But as our meditation practice develops, then we are able to tame our minds enough so that these gross thoughts are no big deal and they kind of lose their power. But then the subtle thoughts come in, and at first they don't distract us, but little by little by little, we give in to them and become distracted. The point is that if we are meditating on the breath, as soon as you realize that you're not meditating on the breath, is to return to the breath. So whatever technique you're doing, when you realize you're not doing it, go back to the technique. The important thing is to remember that all of this is workable, that if you're having lots and lots of thoughts, it's workable. Some new meditators might try for a certain length of time and eventually decide, I can't do it, and give up. But quite honestly, a good sign is when you start having lots and lots of thoughts when you meditate, because it shows that you are being aware. I've attended programs led by Mingyur Rinpoche, and will meditate for a short period of time. And then afterwards, he'll ask the people attending the teaching, how many of you had lots of thoughts? And a number of people raise their hands, easily can be a third or more of the people there. And he said, oh, that's very good. And then he asked, how many of you had few thoughts? And, again, a number of hands show up. Oh, that's very good too. The point is that they were aware of whether they were having lots of thoughts or few thoughts. And that is what is most important in meditation. Not how many thoughts you have, but how aware you are of the amounts of thoughts that you are having. So when you are meditating, we have to be gentle, but we have to be firm. We want to avoid becoming frustrated because thoughts keep coming. They will keep coming. This isn't about stopping the thought, putting a cork in it, so to speak. And frustration can lead to anger, and then trying to discipline your mind in a negative sense and having thoughts about how you're a bad meditator, a bad person, yada, yada, yada. So we need to do this discipline gently, but we have to be firm too. In other words, if you're using the breath when you're meditating, as soon as you realize that you are following thoughts, come right back to following the breath without any additional thoughts about whether you're a good meditator or a bad meditator. Just cut it and go back. Or without thoughts like, well, this was a very interesting path that my mind was going. I've got to think this through, and then I'll come back to the breath. I've got to solve this problem. Krangu Rinpoche mentions that there are 4 kinds of thoughts that are hard to let go of, but they are real obstacles to meditation. And so this is more than just difficult to let go of thoughts. The first is maliciousness, wishing to harm someone, or wishing harm comes to somebody. So it's important to realize when you are having malicious thoughts and quickly let them go. The second is jealousy. You could be jealous of another person in the room that's meditating with you because they are not moving. They're just sitting there like a statue, and they have very good posture and so forth. Comparing other people, wishing that you were that other person. My favorite example of how jealousy can slip in easily has nothing to do with meditating. It has everything to do with going out with friends to a restaurant. So you go to your favorite restaurant with your friends, you order exactly what you want, and your friends, they order what they want. The waitress comes, puts the plates in front of everybody. You look at your plate and you look at the plate of the other people at the table, and you think, I wish I would have ordered that. That's jealousy. So a third one is thoughts of doubt and uncertainty. So if you have doubt and uncertainty, talk to the Lama, because doubt and uncertainty are an obstacle in any activity, mundane or spiritual. And then the fourth one is thoughts of attachment and craving, strong attachment, wanting this, wanting that, not only wanting to have another statue, any kind of craving, wanting to have a better car, wanting to have new clothes, and so forth. Just let go of all of this, so that we need to recognize that these are harmful to our meditation, to let go of them so that they don't continue to be a problem. And then finally, here, there are specific experiences that we can have when we are meditating. The first is that we sit down, start meditating, our mind settles quickly, we're comfortable, our meditation is pleasant, but then as we continue to sit, the mind gets busier and busier, speedier and speedier, our body discomfort increases, and this can be due to overexertion, being too tense, too tight. And the remedy is to relax Here is a quote from Khenpo Karta Rinpoche on sitting meditation. What we are looking for is a sense of being well composed and together, both physically and with mental concentration, but also a sense of openness and of being at ease. So don't be too tight. Now, the opposite can happen, and that is that you're uncomfortable at first, and as the session continues, you become more comfortable, and at the end, you're quite comfortable. Now, this is good, and there's no need to change anything. But again, at the end of the session, let go of it, and the next time you sit, don't expect to have that same experience. Remember that it's always fresh, your meditation experience. And finally, there is the analogy of a river that is used to explain progress in meditation practice. The beginning experience for a meditator is like a river falling over a cliff. It's called a waterfall. And so there's no control whatsoever. The river is just falling, bouncing off rocks that stick out in the cliff. The spray is falling up, is floating up in the air. The water is foaming and full of air, just totally out of control. So that's the first experience when we really start meditating. And when you do that and are having that experience, it's an indication that A, you are aware of what's happening, because this goes on all the time when we're going through our daily lives, but we're not aware of it. The next experience is a rapids, where it's not falling over a cliff, this river, but it's running through a narrow point in the river. There's lots of rocks in it. And again, the water is going in all directions. It's foaming, and there's just a lot of chaos, but it's less than falling over the cliff. The next part is a river that is in a wide valley, and it's meandering around in this valley. And so this is where the mind has calmed down. The mind is still moving, but it's more orderly, it's calmer. You don't have the chaos. And then the next would be when the river meets the ocean and joins the ocean. And now you have this feeling of vastness. An ocean is vast, incredibly vast. And you realize that the waves on the ocean are part of the ocean. They're not separate from the ocean. They're just the surface of the ocean. And the last stage is a vast ocean that doesn't have any waves at all. And this is a very advanced experience. Don't feel, if you never have had that experience, that there's something wrong with you. But it's this experience of vastness combined with calmness, peacefulness, and so forth. The question is, do you meditate with your eyes open or your eyes closed? And what we do is we meditate with our eyes open, but we have options here. The lower our gaze is, the less visual field that we have and the less possible distraction. So if you are a beginning meditator, it's good to keep your eye gaze down to no more than 2 to 3 feet in front of you on the floor. And if your mind is really wild and distracted, definitely keep your gaze down. And in fact, if even with that gaze, your mind is still wild and distracted, you can actually do this, which is slouch and kind of get in a position that you would be in if you're sleepy. Don't do this for an hour. But the point is, if you do that for a little while, this can help your mind calm down. The other thing you can do is, if you're sleepy, then raise your gaze. You raise it up to the ceiling even. Rinpoche gave this instruction, that is to visualize white light coming from the ceiling and filling you up with white light as you're looking up. And this tends to wake you up, keep you more alert. Then the other question was about if you're having visual experiences when you meditate. And I am going to answer talking about any experience that you have when you meditate, because you could have any experience. Suddenly, the meaning of life might appear in your mind, and whatever. And the point is, let go of it and come back to the breath. Don't make a big deal out of it. Write your book after the meditation session. Some people might even feel they need a legal pad next to them on the cushion so they can write down all this inspiration that they're getting. Don't do that. Again, well, if you want to, if it's really valuable, you'll remember it, or it'll come back to you later. But it's amazing how important it can seem. I remember I did a 4-week-long Shamata retreat one time. And by the third week, I was kind of getting tired of the same old thoughts over and over and over again. And one moment I got tremendously inspired, and I thought, what about the Second World War? I could have thought for days about the Second World War. And this was before cell phones, where I could, when I wasn't in the meditation room, I could look this stuff up. I was just ready. Well, I'll tell you what, it did take me a little while, but I caught myself and said, don't go there. But this could have kept me quite busy for the next 2 weeks and through the retreat. So leave your inspiration for writing and contemplation till later, even if it's about Buddhism. Just let go of whatever it is that comes up and come back to the breath, and it's not a big deal. The question was, is it all right to close my eyes and rest them for a few minutes? The person that asked this, there's probably some medical condition that's involved with this too. And she said she's seeing a doctor about this, but that her eyes just get tired. And so if you have to, then close your eyes for a few minutes, but for as short a time as you can, to relieve whatever it is that the problem is. And don't dwell there, because with our eyes closed, it tends to reduce our alertness, and there's less benefit. To put it another way, in plain English, you get more bang for your buck if your eyes are open and blinking, of course.